Good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, I speak in the name of the ancestors, the father of my country, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the goddess of my country, Ezeli, as well as my grandparents, Saïl and Haitian Mocombe, who taught me the ways of the ancestors. My name is Paul Mocombe, and my lecture, I've been invited to speak London, as well as that'll be November 4th, and November 17th, I also have a talk here in the States, as well as November 18th. There's been some commentary on the last video that I posted on Haitian idealism as the epistemological position that comes out of Haitian Vodou. My talk on November 4th in London will emphasize a recent paper that I wrote titled Against Critical Race Theory. And what I do is I apply, in my previous lecture, I talked about how Haitian idealism, as I've constituted it, there are three elements. There's the anti-dialectical process, because there's a parallel between Haitian idealism and the trend which emerges, which is a form of transcendental idealism that emerges out of the ontology of the Haitian people, the Vodou or Vilokan ontology of the Haitian people. There's a parallel between that and the form of German idealism. German idealism will give rise to different elements. For example, Hegel's dialectic and the negative dialectic of the Frankfurt School, the ontological ethics of Immanuel Kant. It will also give rise to the phenomenology of Herschel and Heidegger. I also make the same argument. I argue that Haitian idealism, as it has developed and rationalized over the centuries out of Africa and Haiti, it's given rise to an anti-dialectical process as opposed to a dialectical process. There's also a Nietzschean dialectical process, anti-dialectical process in German idealism. But Haitian idealism does not give rise to that Nietzschean subjective anti-dialectic, because Haitian anti-dialectic will give rise to an attempt to emphasize difference or constitute difference as a form of social and system integration via the Lakou system. This is the argument that I am making in my book, The Voodoo Ethic and the Spirit of Communism. I'm arguing that the anti-dialectical historical process that emerges out of Vodou, give rise to the Haitian Revolution, will be constituted by the Haitian Africans in the mountains and provinces as a form of communism expressed via the socio-economic political organization called the Lakou system. So that's the emphasis. So I juxtapose the reason why I wrote the paper Against Critical Race Theory, because I argue that the blacks in America, the blacks elsewhere in the Caribbean, they will adopt the dialectical process to their fight against slavery, colonialism, whereas the originating moments of the Haitian Revolution is an anti-dialectical process for the Africans. What would happen is the black Americans, the majority of the blacks in the Caribbean, as well as in Africa as well, like the affranchis of Haiti, will approach their fight against colonialism and slavery dialectically, which means that they're seeking equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution with whites within the form of system and social integration that I call the Protestant ethic and the spirit of communism, whereas the Africans at the originating Mocombe, Cecile Fatima Mambo, Cecile Fatima Bookman, they're called, especially if you really analyze Bookman's prayer, he's calling for a total rapture with the colonial system so that they can implement total equality and liberty within what would become Haiti. And that for me is an anti-dialectical process. I utilize that anti-dialectical process to critique the Black American movement, for example, to critique, to juxtapose that process with the dialectical process we find in Black America, in the Caribbean, and elsewhere. So I used that in my most recent published article titled Against Critical Race Theory. That is the argument that I'm making. I'm juxtaposing the intellectual movement we call critical race theory that comes out of legal studies, and I juxtapose that against the anti-dialectical moments of the originating moments of the Haitian Revolution. So that, and my talk in London will be to do the same thing, but this time I'm incorporating not only critical race theory, but Western feminism, intersectionality, because intersectionality, Western feminism, transgenderism, all of those movements, these what we call identity politic movements, they're a dialectical attack on the Protestant ethic and the spirit of communism, which means they're seeking equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution without a dismantling of the social system. Whereas if you juxtapose that against what the Haitians would do at the originating moments of Bois-Caïman, when they're calling for a total destruction of the social system to reconstitute the social system. So if you look at that that development intellectually, so this is why the Lacoux system will develop as a form of communism where difference is constituted as a form of social and system integration. And so it becomes a form of socio-economic political system against the Protestant and the global capitalist world system that would give rise to colonialism, mercantilism, etc. So that will be my argument in London. So I've incorporated, it's not only called Against Critical Race Theory, but it's called, the paper will be titled Against Critical Race Theory, against feminism, against transgenderism, against intersectionality in general. And then from there, I will conclude my talk when I return, my talk in Miramar will be on how we must approach the contemporary issue of climate change within the anti-dialectical logic of the Haitian people themselves. We must utilize an anti-dialectical logic to confront the issue of climate change which threatens humanity. So my argument is anti-dialectic must become our source, our form of historical process, because we must start to critique climate change as a product of capitalist development and capitalist organization. So therefore, out of Haitian idealism, transcendental idealism, which is the epistemology within Vodou, you get this anti-dialectical process, not in the Nietzschean sense, because Nietzsche is calling for a subjectivity, a freedom of subjectivity. Anti-dialectic of the Haitian Revolution is trying to constitute acceptance and freedom, total liberty, libertarianism, egalitarianism. So it's trying to constitute a different form of social system and integration that allows difference or accepts difference. And we must use this anti-dialectical process to now confront the issue of climate change that is confronting humanity, that threatens humanity contemporarily. So we move away from identity politics and start to focus on this issue of this anti-dialectical process to our contemporary historical moment to deconstruct the Protestant ethic and the spirit of global capitalism that is dominating humanity today. And if you all do not, I hope the university uploads my presentation. If not, I will upload all the presentations and the papers that come out of these presentations. So I thank you all for your comments on my most recent presentation, and keep following my lectures and read my work. So I thank you all for the comments and feedback. Thank you.